There are two vibrant Fujifilm looks, Velvia and Astia, that have some important differences you might care about. So in this video, we're going to look at the main characteristics of those two film simulations, looking at the contrast and the color, and when you might want to use one over the other. This is a follow-up to some recent videos that I did comparing classic neg and classic chrome, and classic neg to nostalgic neg. So let's take a look at Velvia versus Astia. Velvia, also called vivid, is commonly used for landscapes. And I loved using Velvia slide film when I was in college, living in Arizona, going out to photograph the Arizona landscape with Velvia. It was perfect for those scenes. Astia, which is called soft, isn't called soft for its contrast. It's called soft for the way that it renders skin tones. Now, that's not to say that you can't use it for landscapes. It still has some punch and some contrast despite being called soft. We're going to start by looking at contrast, looking at just a regular landscape. It appears here that both Velvia and Astia have more contrast than Provia, with Velvia obviously rendering more shadow contrast, and we can really see that looking at the histograms. These photos and all of the rest that you're going to see throughout this video, they don't have any other adjustments applied to them other than changing the film simulations. We're going to look at this flowers photo that we looked at in our last comparison video, Velvia again with a lot more shadow contrast. Just look at that highlight contrast real quick, the contrast in the flower petals. We're going to come back to that. But if we look at another high contrast landscape, notice how both Velvia and Astia overall have more contrast than Provia. But what's important to know about comparing these two film simulations is that in high contrast scenes, Velvia is really going to crush those shadow tones into the blacks, and you might have some highlight clipping too. But one of the most important differences between Astia and Velvia is the way Astia renders highlights, specifically in the skin tones, and that is why Astia is called soft. I wanted to use this photo in this comparison to highlight this. No pun intended. Notice how Provia, the sunlit area on the cheek, it's quite bright and it loses some tonal information. It just looks really flat. It's very harshly lit. But if we switch to Astia, those highlights are brought down and we get some smoother skin tones on that bright cheek and even throughout the rest of the face. It just has a softer look. There's less overall contrast. So Astia is a really good film simulation to use when you still want that punchy contrast and those vibrant colors, but want to retain overall smoother looking skin. Speaking of color, watch what happens if we were to photograph this in Velvia. That cheek highlight is now way overblown, and the extra saturation of Velvia makes that skin look orange. You have to be very careful when photographing people with Velvia. Depending on their skin tone, the lighting, and the white balance, it can make people look jaundiced, which I'm sure they're not going to appreciate. But even when we compare skin colors of Provia and Astia, Astia, despite having some more punch than Provia, renders these really soft skin tones, more so than Provia. But look at the blues and the greens behind them. Those greens have more color in Astia, and those blues, that's one of my favorite things about Astia, is this electric blue color. It's a lot more different than Velvia. Velvia, which was specifically designed for landscapes, renders blue differently. It targets the skies, adding a little bit of magenta tint to the blue skies, and overall, much more saturated in all the colors than Provia, and even more saturated than Astia. Just look at that sky and the water here, comparing these film simulations. Velvia was also meant to render greens in a way that reminds you of fresh cut grass, that really vibrant, fresh, natural green. We don't get that with Provia or even Astia. Be careful when photographing waterfalls, though. Those greens, using Velvia, are going to be more vibrant, but that water might be too bright and overly saturated. it might be too blue for the kind of color tone that you're trying to go for with that water. Astia may be a good substitute. It's still going to make that green look more lively than Provia while rendering softer water than both Provia and especially Velvia. So, those are the big takeaways when comparing Velvia and Astia. Both of these film simulations have more contrast than Provia, the standard film simulation, especially Velvia. It has a lot more contrast and it's really going to crush those shadow tones. So, be aware of that. Astia, however, is going to do a really good job of taming the highlight tones, especially when photographing skin. It's going to give you great, natural looking portraits, but retain punchy colors without oversaturating the skin. Velvia was designed for the colors that you'll find in nature, and that's why it's such a favorite film simulation to use for both landscape and nature photography. Just be careful when you're photographing people using Velvia. So I hope you were able to take away a lot of big differences between Velvia and Astia, when you might want to use them. If you want to learn even more differences about all of the Fujifilm film simulations, you can check out my free Learn Fujifilm Film Simulations course, which you'll find linked at photocourses.link/filmsims. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe for more great tips like this every week, and we'll see you in the next video.